Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all having a good weekend. I'm sorry I've not posted a video in a while. I've just been really busy with work. I've been doing overtime shifts, so I've been working a lot and just try to deal with some personal business. So I thought I'd jump on here today and do another murder, mystery and makeup because I've not done that in about 2 weeks. I've just started this little series and I'm going to post one murder, mystery and makeup video a week, and I'll also post one random video in between that as well. So today's positive quote of the day is... Oh, it's went out of my head. Oh, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. That just went out of my head there. So today we're going to be talking about Fred and Rose West, one of the most notorious British, if not the world, couple serial killers. So I'm just going to do my makeup and just talk through their story, their crimes, the murder, the investigation and so on. So before filming this video for the last week and a half, I've been watching documentaries on them, YouTube videos, reading about them, taking notes, so I could fill my head, my little noggin, with as much information about them as possible. With names and dates, I'm not so good at remembering the crimes, investigation, their past, their childhood. I've got all that there, but like names and stuff like that of like the victims or their mums, I've totally went out of my head. I've remembered some, but not them all. So I've already cleansed, toned and moisturised my face and put on some makeup primer. So I'm going to start with doing my foundation and let's just get stuck into the video. So I'm going to start with some foundation and we'll just dive right in. So I'm going to first start by talking about Fred West and a bit about his background. So Fred West was one of 8 children. I think he was the 6th born out of 8 children. Fred was born in the 50s. I can't remember what it was, 1950, I want to say the early 50s, but I can't remember the exact date, but I know it was the 50s. So he was born in the 50s. His dad went between jobs and his mum was a housewife, but right from the word go, Fred had a bit of a troubled childhood. His family, especially his mum, they were known for being a bit strange and a bit weird and, you know, like being a bit untidy and a bit unkept, you know, like I think a bit neglected of the parents. So Fred grew up, he stayed with his 7 other siblings in a small house, 3-bedroom. Fred wasn't academically smart. He was always failing, not turning up for classes. He didn't attend any like secondary education or anything like that. So he didn't do too well. Fred was known for being more of a like hands-on person, like doing like hands-on jobs. And he kind of went between jobs when he was older. Sorry, this red stuff, I'm just trying to cancel out the shadow of my beard. He went between jobs when he was older. But so Fred's dad was known as and his mum, they were known as disciplinarians. They were quite strict with all their children. They kind of ruled the house with a bit of an iron fist, and they were just known for being like really, really strict. They didn't really let Fred or his brothers and sisters like socialise, which is strange, but I think they were just very, very strict, and as I said, a lot of people found them a bit of a weird family. But what I do find interesting is that Fred's family were quite incestuous, like they were quite an incest family. So as Fred and his older sisters got older, they started having sexual relationships with the parents. So Fred Fred's dad would regularly sleep with Fred's sisters, and when Fred was 14, the person that Fred lost his virginity to was his mum. So as you can see, from his childhood and very early on, Fred was taught that, you know, sexual relationships, non-consensual sex, you know, I must look so fucked up mood right now with this on. Consensual, you know, non-consensual sex. Fred was taught from a very, very young age that that was normal, and that, you know, there was nothing wrong with doing those kind of acts and behaviour. Especially, Fred's dad was known for always saying to him, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't get caught. So Fred was kind of brought up thinking that, you know, he could do whatever he wanted, he could treat people whatever way he wanted, you know, he could have his way with people, and he could do whatever he wants as long as he was careful and he didn't get caught. And obviously growing up in the house he grew up in, where he watched, you know, his dad have sexual relationships with his sisters and stuff like that, like, that was normalised to him. So, you know, that's another factor in maybe why Fred turned out to be the person that, you know, he became to be. It was also known that also when he was maybe about 8 years old, he had a really, really, really bad head injury, and he was in hospital for several weeks and had to get emergency operated on. And investigators and mental health experts also think that, you know, Fred having that head injury when he was younger, on top of, you know, having a sexual relationship with his mother and living in like an incestuous household, you know, that all played a major part in his murders and his rapes later in life. So as a teenager, as I said, Fred carried on his relationship with his mum all through his teens. And obviously his father all through, you know, his sister's teenage years, were still sleeping with his sisters as well. Like, gross. But, you know, you always find with serial killers that a lot of them, you know, haven't had easy childhoods, and it doesn't excuse what they do and what, you know, the crimes that they commit, but, you know, you can see a pattern that kind of makes sense, do you know what I mean? Like, you usually find if in broken homes, you know, child abuse, you know, they've a lot of them have grew up in, you know, homes where that kind of behaviour is acceptable or bad behaviour isn't punished, and they just kind of get away with whatever they want. And especially, you know, because Fred was having a sexual relationship with his mother, you know, he was his mother's favourite, so they were having a sexual relationship, but also Fred's mum would let him away with whatever he wanted to do. As I said, Fred would never go to school, he wasn't good at school, you know, and his mum had no problem with letting him stay off school. She had no problem with letting him stay out all night, with drinking young, with hanging about a bad kid. You know, he was never disciplined, he was never told no, he was never told that's wrong. And especially his dad saying, you know, you can do whatever you want as long as you get away with it. Like, that's not a good, you know, life lesson or something to teach your kid. You know, you're just totally, you know, teaching them the wrong things, and that's not always, but most of the time, that's going to lead someone down a very dark criminal path, which obviously he went down. So as I said, as a teenager, he went between jobs, had multiple sexual partners, and a lot of these sexual partners were underage. As I said, that's his childhood. So Fred was in and out of jail all through his teenage years for petty crimes like robbery, theft, assault, battery of women, just your average stuff, you know. Not. You know, in and out of jail as a teenager, obviously that was a sign of, you know, what was to come with him, clearly. So yeah, Fred was like in and out of prison. He then meets a girl at the age of 15. Fred is in his early 20s at this point, and this girl's only 15. Fred and her, when she turns 16, they then progress to get married, and they have a child. Fred has his first child, the woman's name that Fred marries, her name's Rita. And they go on, and they're from Glasgow. Well, Rita's from Glasgow, this is Fred's first wife before he met Rose. Rita's from Glasgow, so Fred moves up to Glasgow to be with Rita, and he has his first child, Charmaine. So Fred then gets to jail, gets prison again, and his wife is left with the young kid. Fred gets out jail and decides that he doesn't want to be there anymore and that he wants to move back down to England. So for some reason, I'm not entirely sure why, but Fred's first wife lets Fred take Charmaine, which is his first daughter to this lady. She lets Fred have custody of her and lets Fred take her back down to England. Like, big mistake, but obviously maybe she didn't have enough money to support this young girl, or maybe, you know, she just didn't have, you know, the space, like whatever it may be. She obviously let Fred take her young daughter down to England. So Fred goes down to England and he stays in a small apartment with his daughter Charmaine and still going in between jobs. So we'll talk a wee bit as well about Fred West. Her childhood really wasn't any better. Same kind of situation. Rose was one of 3 or 4 children. Rose was known when she was younger for being a bit stupid and a bit simple and a bit, you know, not fully there. People used to call her Dozy Rosie. And as a child as well, she also showed signs of maybe having mental health issues. As a child, she would rock herself back and forth. She would do strange things. You know, she just didn't seem completely as if she was mentally completely there. Rose was also from an incestuous childhood. At a very young age, Rose began a sexual relationship with her father, and to mention, this relationship carried on well into Rose's adulthood. I think right up until her father died, Rose carried on that relationship. So Rose at a very young age was having a relationship with her father, and was just, she was being taught at a very young age the wrong things, you know, the wrong life lessons. She was being taught, you know, the wrong idea, and from a young age has obviously been sexualised by her father and, you know, made to engage in sexual acts from a very, very young age. Rose was also from a very, very, very strict home. Her mother was called Daisy, but her mother was also didn't keep very well. Her mum had major depression and would sometimes, you know, hit Rose and her siblings. The dad would do the same. He was also an alcoholic. And on top of that, they weren't very well kept kids. They were quite neglected as well. Rose didn't go much to school, you know, she was just a dropout. So Rose then at 15 gets a job working in a laundrette, and one morning on her way to work, that is when Rose meets Fred. They're at a bus stop, and at first Rose really isn't, you know, she's not that interested in Fred. As I said, you know, Fred West was actually known for not really taking care of himself. You know, he had greasy hair, he hardly washed, you know, he didn't look after his teeth, he was quite untidily dressed, you know, he was just known about for being very, you know, unclean looking. And Rose was not interested in Fred. She turned him down several times. Fred would walk to the bus stop nearly every morning and try and, you know, chat Rose up. And as Rose had said in a letter and to a friend, that she wasn't interested in Fred, but he was very charming. That he had charm, he was witty, he was funny, and he showed a real interest in her. But obviously at the time, Rose is only 15 at the time, and Fred is, I think he's in his late 20s or early 30s. So, you know, this yet again, you know, is a very paedophilic relationship. Rose is underage, Fred's well into his 20s, she's not even 16 yet. But as I said, obviously because his past and his childhood and hers, this is nothing to them. So fourth time lucky, Rose finally decides to Fred that she'll go on a date with him, and, you know, she gives in to his advantages eventually. So they get on the bus and they start talking, they go for a drink, and that night they have sex. and they both talk and realise that they enjoy the same kind of sexual endeavours. They're both into BDSM, rough sex, you know, weird sexual acts. You know, Fred was known for saying he doesn't like anything that's vanilla. That means like he's into really like BDSM, torture, and Rose is pretty much the same. You know, they had the same sexual appetite. So obviously Rosie's mum and dad, they're not too pleased about this relationship, which is strange because, you know, the dad himself had a sexual relationship with Rose, so it's strange that himself, you know, wasn't. But maybe that could have been jealousy. It could have been that, you know, he wanted Rose all to himself, and you know he didn't want her to, you know, be with other men. You know, it's a bit strange that after, you know, his history with her, that, you know, he wants to take, you know, the caring dad side. Like he'd been sleeping with his daughter from when he was very, very young. So Rosie's family, you know, they aren't, you know, they aren't accepting this relationship with Fred. Rose is still 15, you know, she tries to move in with Fred, which her family do not allow, but Rose does it anyway. So what her family then decide to do is her family decide to phone social work, and for a few months Rose is placed in a child's home, and when she's in the child's home, Fred also puts his daughter Charmaine into social work because he gets prison again for another petty crime. And when Fred gets out of the prison, it's good to mention that Fred also was took to court for raping a woman, but he got fined, and that was it. And it's strange that the amount of criminal things that Fred had done as a teenager and right into adulthood, he always seemed to get away with it. Like, he never seemed to, you know, get prison time, or it was always just a fine, or, you know, he was in prison for a couple of weeks or a couple of days. Like, he never seemed to actually get, you know, reprimanded for these crimes. So Rose gets out the care home, and by this time she's 16, so she's, you know, more than old enough to make her own decisions. So she decides that she is going to move in with Fred and help raise his daughter Charmaine. Rose's parents are still not very happy about this, but, you know, she's 16, you know, she can do what there's not much they can do about it. So Rose moves in, and after a while, Rose starts abusing Charmaine and like beating this girl really badly, you know, just hitting her, abusing her, and Fred really doesn't do anything about it. Because I think, to be honest, I think Rose was the one that really ran the house with like an iron fist. So in between that time of Rose moving in, Fred gets prison again, and this time he's in prison for a little while this time. So he is, and Rose becomes unable, like, to handle Fred's daughter, to handle Charmaine. Like, Rose she can't handle it. She can't cope, and Rose then begins to, you know, abuse Charmaine even more. And what Rose didn't like about Charmaine as well was that after all the beatings and all the abuse, like, that Rose would inflict on this girl, the girl never showed any signs of like weakness. She never showed any signs of like, she never cried. She never showed any emotion. So, Rose, when Fred was in prison, this happened. Rose kills Charmaine when Fred is in prison. She doesn't. I don't think Rose meant to kill Charmaine, but I think what Rose basically done was she basically bet this girl, like, gave this girl hit this girl so much and gave her such a severe, you know, beating that she basically bet the girl to death. Rose then buries the girl, stores the girl's body in like a fire pit thing in the basement. kind of oven fire thing until Fred can get out of the prison and they can figure out how they're going to dispose of the body. So fast forward to a couple of months later, and Fred then gets out of prison. Rose basically tells Fred what she's done, and obviously he's like, you know, he doesn't really give a shit. So he's just like, oh, you murdered my daughter. Okay, no worries. You know, let's just bury the body. You know, so, but obviously, Fred's ex-wife Rita, she used to come down and obviously visit Charmaine a lot. And I think the reason that she left her daughter with Fred was because she seen that Fred was working. You know, he had a house, he had a girlfriend, he had that mother figure. I think she felt that, you know, that Fred would, you know, was in a better financial position, and, you know, was probably more able to look after Charmaine than she was. So anyway, it's not long till the Fred's first wife, the mother of Charmaine, comes looking for her, and to her surprise is told that Charmaine had ran away. So Rita, obviously not really accepting this prize, Fred, and starts really questioning him. And Rita, you know, really doesn't give up. She comes back to the house asking questions nearly every day, and that is when Rita decides that, you know, she is going to phone the police, because she's like, even though she's not really like seen her daughter, like she knows her daughter, and she knows that, you know, she knows that something isn't right. So she decides that she is going to, that, you know, that she's going to phone the police, and that she's going to make the police aware that, you know, her daughter's gone missing, and even at that, even if she had run away, like, Rita had also said to Fred why Fred had contacted the police and letted the police or anything know about it. So Rita went to the police, and that is when Rose begins to see that Fred's wife Rita is going to be a problem, and that's when they both decide that, you know, they have to get rid of her. So they kill Rita and they bury her body. And Fred actually, in his, you know, police interviews, he like brags about this, about burying the bodies and all that. Like it's just really horrible, to think of. It really is. So after they obviously murder Fred's daughter and his first wife, Rosie's dad insists that Rose go for a medical inspection at the doctor's. I really don't know why, but I think it was maybe to do with, I think the dad maybe thought that Fred was like maybe abusing Rose, like hitting her and stuff like that, which is, you know, it's strange that he's playing the role of a doting father considering the history that he's had of her. But anyway, he makes Rose go to a doctor. The doctor examines her, and then the doctor realises that Rose is pregnant with Fred's child. Now, Rosie's mum and dad at this point, they're absolutely, they're furious. You know, they're just so angry. They tell Rose she's to get an abortion, that they want nothing to do with her, that she's to stay away from Fred. You know, they're really not happy. But Rose, you know, she's old enough at this point, you know, she's making her own decisions. She decides, along with Fred, that they're going to keep the kid. So that's when Fred and Rose, at this point, at this point, Fred West is working as an ice cream driver. Can you imagine that? Like, what? It doesn't get any worse. Like, Fred West working in an ice cream van, creating about all the kids. Like, ugh. I get the heebie-jeebies just thinking about that. So, you know, Fred gets a job, and the two of them move into a house in 25 Cornwall Street, I think. And this is then referred to as the House of Murders, because this is where, you know, they murdered all their victims, including their own daughter. And they buried her there at the back door under their patio. So they move in there. Rose has her first kid, Heather, who I'm going to talk about later on. Rose is our first kid, Heather, and Rose and Fred then go on to have several more children. So Fred and Rose West decide that they need a nanny. So they hire a girl at the age of 16 to come and work as a nanny to look after their children. At this time, Rose then starts to become a prostitute, and they kind of turned her home into like a makeshift brothel. And Rose has got, different men in and out every night. And bearing in mind, that this is in front of her kids, just like I can't imagine the childhood that the kids must have had with him in that house. Fred, he's not really any different from Rosemary, so he has got no problem with Rose doing this. He actually becomes her pimp and takes half the money. Fred at times sometimes joins in, and Fred and Rose also installed a kind of peephole in most of the rooms, so that when Rose was engaging in sexual acts with these men, Fred could basically watch, and just creepy stuff. So this goes on for several years as well, and they also think that Rose West as well fathered children to some of her clients. They don't think that all her children are actually Fred's. They think she may have they do think she may have fathered other guys may have fathered some of her children, which wouldn't surprise me, considering what she was doing. So the babysitter's also done interviews about this. She said that she was so young at the time, she had an idea about what Rose was doing, but she just kind of seen it as, they're employing me to do a job, it's not really my business to get involved, I'm just going to come here, do my job, look after the kids, go home and, earn my money. I'm not going to get, involved in their personal lives and what they choose to do. And the breaking, and Rose and Fred West at this time, they start trying to make advances on this young girl. And one night, this is their babysitter. They tie her up, torture her, sexually abuse her, stub cigarettes out on her, they just do all this awful stuff to her. But they don't murder her. This is before they murder her. Fred and Rose West went step by step. So they just basically tied the girl up, tortured her, raped her, and then they let her go. The girl goes home to her mum, and she's covered in bruises, she's covered in scratches a lot. Her mum asks this girl, what happened. The girl won't tell her at first, and then the girl eventually comes clean, and tells her mum what she endured at the hands of the Wests. So her mum phones the police. The police go out to investigate. It goes to court, but when it goes up to court, the girl decides that she can't go through with it, and decides that she doesn't want to basically talk about it again. So it kind of falls through, and they get away with it again. So a few years pass. Rose is still doing her prostitution. Fred's still engaging in whatever he's engaging in, but they haven't committed any murders yet. So one night, they're out driving, and they see this young girl hitchhiking. They pick her up and they ask her where she's going. She says that she's heading a similar way as them. They say that they'll drop her off. So, about not long into this journey, they ask the girl if she wants a job. This time, the girl, this is the 70s, jobs were if somebody offered you a job, that was amazing, that was, oh my god. So the girl's over the moon. She's like, oh yeah, of course, what do you need me to do? And they're like, oh, we just need you to babysit. And obviously they fill the girl in on, their living situation, how many kids they have, and so on. So the girl happily takes the job, and she heads back home with them that night. I think the girl at this time must have been about 17, so she was old enough to kind of make her own decisions, and you know what I mean. So like, it's not as if she was underage and like her parents were looking for her, or why didn't she just go home. She decides to go home with Fred and Rose West, and they tell her that, you know, they will provide her with a bed, you know, they'll look after her. All she has to really do is just, you know, look after their children. So this girl at the time, you know, she's over the moon. She thinks she's bagged herself a wee job. So a couple of days into it, Fred and Rose West start making like sexual advances on her as well, and she's their first victim. So they basically, one night, you know, Fred makes a move on this girl. She tries to escape. You know, they knock her over the head and they basically kill her. They rape her, torture her, all these cruel things to her, and then they bury her out the back door under the patio. It's also worth to mention that, you know, Fred and Rose West also made like a makeshift sexual torture dungeon underneath their home, and they made like their own kind of BDSM torture chamber, and this is where they would take their victims. They would sometimes video it, they would sometimes record that, they would sometimes take pictures. Because it was underground, they made sure it was soundproof as well. And it was way it was downstairs. They had 2 floors, 3 floors, and it was the very bottom floor, so they could take their victim down here. It was soundproof, no one would hear them, the kids wouldn't know what was going on. You know, it was their own wee little strange place that they made into their own kind of torture chamber. So this is their first victim. So that, sorry guys, I had to go and do my lashes off camera. So this is the look. I'm finished, but I'm still going to carry on with the video. So I done this really quickly today. So yeah, so they made a makeshift torture chamber under their house, and that's where they would take their victims, sexually abuse them, torture them, murder them, dismember them, and then take them away to bury them. Their house was known as the House of Horrors. So this would be like a regular thing for Fred and Rose. They would drive about, pick up young girls, like young hitchhikers, offer them a job as a babysitter, lure them home, torture them, have sex with them, kill them, take them to the torture chamber, and then obviously bury them. Sometimes they would video the acts, take pictures, you know, record what they were doing, you know, stuff like that, just so they would have like a wee souvenir of like their crimes. So this went on for about 8 years, you know, no one noticed, like nothing. In between that time, they also killed their own daughter Heather, and this was because Heather had said to someone at school what was going on at home, and social work came out, you know, had a wee look around. For some reason, they never seen the basement underneath, you know, and it kind of get put down to the daughter was making things up. Obviously, Fred and Rose weren't happy about this, you know, she was a threat to them, she could get them caught, so they murdered her and they buried their teenager under their patio outside. And Fred would regularly make jokes to his other children that their sister was buried under the patio. So years went by, they carried on their murders, the same thing, picking up young hitchhikers, offering them jobs as babysitters, bringing them home, raping them, torturing them, and killing them. They think there was over like 30 murders, possibly more. So come the early 90s, they pick up this young girl, bring her home, you know, same situation, torture her and rape her, but for some reason they don't kill this young girl. For some reason they let this young girl go, which, you know, was originally, well, you know, that was her downfall. They bring this girl home, you know, they do the same thing to her. They keep her for 2 days, but she for some reason manages to convince Fred and Rose to let her go, which they do. The girl then goes to the police, reports it to the police come out, interview Rose, and Rose just breaks down. She tells the police, you know, blame Fred. The police then are thinking, what's she talking about? They get a search warrant for the house, you know, they find all the bondage stuff, all the tapes, all the equipment. They bring in Fred, you know, he's not really saying much, but Rose is, you know, Rose is like, she's blaming all the murders on him, you know, it's all him, she was young at the time, she didn't know what she was doing, you know, Rose did know, because it's like on the videos and the tapes, you can hear her, she was just as involved, you know, as he was. You know, she blames it all on Fred. The police then begin to, you know, dig up their back garden, and that's when they find like 9 or 10 bodies, including her daughter. And Fred also takes them to locations where he's buried other people. And when it comes to Charmaine, They find out about Charmaine, but they find obviously Fred was in prison when this murder happened, so they then realise that Rose can't be as innocent as what she's saying she is, because she's the one who had custody of Charmaine, and Charmaine disappeared when Fred was in jail, so it couldn't have been him that done it. So that's when her story starts to break, and they realise that, she's not a victim, she wasn't controlled by Fred, she was just as much to blame as him. So they think they committed 30 murders overall, including their own family. It was going up for trial, but before the trial, Fred killed himself, and he also killed himself because Rose refused to speak to him. Whether that was because she blamed him for everything that happened, or she blamed him for him being the reason she was in prison, I don't know, but he killed himself, and on his gravestone he got put, "Here lies Fred West, where no shadow falls," while he waits for his wife Rose. So right up until his very last day, before he killed himself, he loved Rose. Rose cut all ties with him, completely abandoned him, wouldn't take his letters, wouldn't take his calls. So Fred, because of what, he's about to go up to court for these multiple murders, Rose isn't talking to him, he just killed himself. Rose was gave life in prison with no parole. Rose West is still in prison to this day. She's not allowed to appeal for parole, she's not allowed to get out. She's in her late 60s now, Rose West, and she will be in prison until the day she dies. She's still alive in Her Majesty's prison in England. I'm not sure what one, we need to check that up. Rose enjoys, supposedly in prison she knits, and has friends, and she's supposedly top dog in the jails. A lot of people are scared of her, but I suppose she's been there a long time, so... Rose to this day hasn't confessed to any of the murders and still pleads her innocence. So that's today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I wasn't good with any of the names. There's a lot of victims and a lot of names to remember, but you guys can Google that. There's hundreds of stuff on Google and on YouTube if you guys want to delve into this even further and you want to learn more, about the victims' names, the dates, and so on. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned in for my videos that are coming the next couple of weeks. Have a nice weekend and stay gorgeous. Bye.